When I say the word pirates, I'm guessing that for a lot of people, the first thing that comes to mind might be, I don't know, Johnny Depp and the Pirates of the Caribbean, or maybe Blackbeard or some of these other ones. But actually, some of the coolest pirates, if you can call thieves and often murderers cool, were from China. And today we're looking at a special pirate couple who terrorized both sides of the Taiwan Strait in the early 1800s, but did so with a kind of, you might say, style. Today we're looking at the pirate Tsai, who proclaimed himself Taiwan's king who stabilizes the seas and possesses military might, and had plans to create a new Ming-style dynasty on Taiwan, with himself as emperor, of course. And Tsai's wife, Tsai Ma, an English-speaking, opium-smoking practitioner of free love, and she was a pirate queen who allegedly went into battle minus any clothing covering her torso.
The Taiwan History Podcast, Formosa Files, is made possible through the generous sponsorship of the Frank C. Chen Foundation. Formosa Files.
So I hope you guys don't mind that it'll just be me telling this week's tale. And no, I'm not embarking on a solo career. This podcast wouldn't be possible without John Ross. But John is ridiculously busy right now finishing up the final touches and edits to an English translation of an epic historical novel by Dr. Chen Yaojiang. It's called A Tale of Three Tribes in Dutch Formosa, and basically it's half history book, half fiction, and it's coming soon. So anyway, our story today moves past the Dutch and past 1683, when the grandson of Qing and his kingdom of Dongning was finally defeated by the Qing Empire. Qing's grandson surrendered, and Taiwan, after some reluctance from Kangxi, the Qing emperor, becomes part of China. Not that China ruled all of the island after 1683, far from it. But by 1790, for example, the Qing did have soldiers stationed in important spots along the west coast of Taiwan, and were relatively in control of major population areas along the west coast. But rebellions continued, and I mean a lot of rebellions. And among these rebels were a whole bunch of pirates. So the Taiwan Strait has had pirates probably since boats were invented. But by the 1700s, pirates in this region had discovered that Taiwan was a wonderful hideout spot. You know, probably the most famous pirate, a pirate warlord, would actually be the person we were just talking about earlier, Qing, or Zheng Gong. And come to think of it, Qing's father, Zheng Zilong, was the OG pirate warlord, you might say. He started out as a young man working on trading ships and quickly worked his way up to become perhaps the richest man in the world, or at least possibly the richest man in Asia at that time. Qing's dad, Zheng Zilong, was a warlord pirate who morphed into a major business person, whose fleets transported goods around Asia, and who also had some well-armed ships that could offer, protection to other trading ships, for a fee, of course. Qing inherited a maritime trading empire from his dad, and became lord of fleets of ships sailing from China to Japan or through the Taiwan Strait all the way down to what's today Indonesia and other parts of Southeast Asia. But for today's story, the Qing clan is gone, Taiwan is technically part of the Qing Empire, and we're looking at the turn of the century, so 1800. The late 1700s and early 1800s was a serious age of piracy in this region. And I'm not going to say golden age, because even though in the West many seem to romanticize pirates, best illustrated by Johnny Depp's character in Pirates of the Caribbean, and other pirate stories I used to read when I was a kid, the fact of the matter was that most pirates were criminals, and some were very often extremely cruel. Of course, there were exceptions. Qing's dad, for example, is said to have bailed out villages in southern coastal China when famine hit, and provided jobs, as pirate/soldiers for many young people who otherwise might have starved to death. But anyway, let's get back to Tsai and his wife, Tsai Ma, who I think I'll mostly call during this episode the Pirate Queen to avoid confusion. The information for this episode comes mostly from a book by Professor Henry Tsai, a former Asian studies professor at the University of Arkansas, and author of quite a few books. The one this info comes from is called Maritime Taiwan, Historical Contrasts with the East and the West. Professor Henry Tsai has some very interesting information about this period. In 1790, the book says, there were at least 10 major pirate organizations operating back and forth across the Taiwan Strait, attacking the coastlines of Zhejiang, Fujian, and Guangdong provinces, and then also frequently coming over to Taiwan and landing anywhere from Danshui, or down to Tainan, or even Donggang in modern-day Pingdong. So the author of this book, Maritime Taiwan, Henry Tsai, he writes that, quote, "The most widespread and destructive raiders came under the command of the Fukienese, or Fujianese, Taichuan. Tsai grew up in poverty and only turned to piracy when he was about 45 years old," end quote. So Tsai gets going, and before long he has 100-plus pirate vessel, you might say armada, that cruises the China coast and attacks government junks and trading ships. A very impressive man, but equally impressive was Taichuan's wife. She's known by a whole bunch of different names, but the most common way I've noticed her referred to is Taichuan Ma like mother. That doesn't mean she was her husband's mother. It was more like an honorific. People in Fujian would use Ma as a respectful way to refer to a powerful woman, and she was a powerful woman. This pirate queen may perhaps not have been exactly her husband's equal, but she was kind of also in charge of the fleet. And sometimes they would split up and she would command her part of the armada. So Taichuan Ma, or the pirate queen, is said to have spoken fluent English, or English well enough to communicate with foreigners. And that meant that she could chat with Western traders and buy foreign weapons, which in turn means that their pirate boats had better cannon and likely other superior modern weapons. And remember, the Qing dynasty are the descendants of wild nomads from Manchuria, not exactly seafarers, and for a long time the Qing Navy was a pretty weak entity that really couldn't do much about this pirate infestation. By the year 1800, Taichuan had between 15,000 and 20,000 quote-unquote sailors, you could call them. Some of these people were political refugees, pro-Ming dynasty, anti-Qing dynasty people, like Qing and his heirs. But call them what you want, basically he's got an army of maybe as many as 20,000 raiders under his command. And Taiwan was his favorite place to go whenever he needed to retreat and hoard his riches. And the book says he became very well acquainted with the island. So another book I read said that his wife, Taichuan Ma, the pirate queen, was the one who came up with a way of dividing the loot that they collected, and it went something like this. A third of it went into a communal pot for, fixing ships and general maintenance of weapons and all that, so stuff you need to keep your army in top shape for battle. And then a third of it was buried on various small islands or in different places, hidden for future use. And then finally, the last third was divvied up with some degree of equality between the commanders and sailors and raiders that they controlled. Now, it's impossible to know if that's exactly true, and we don't have a lot of evidence of crates of booty found on islands. But it's possible she didn't actually order them to bury the treasure, but instead put it into communities in Taiwan or China for safekeeping. Anyway, much of the story is lost and now is more legend than history. But we do know that just after 1800, Taichuan starts to get a bit wilder, and he raids Danshui and even Yilan on the northeast coast of Taiwan. He also raids Tainan and Fengshan in southern Taiwan, and actually basically every Taiwanese town that they can hit in between. The Qing dynasty mandarins on Taiwan, so the mandarins were the local Qing supervisors, they're powerless to stop this, which frustrated the local people to no end. And over on the Chinese side, the emperor and his court are also frustrated because they can't seem to do anything about it, and this weakness, of course, is not something you want to display as a relatively new dynasty. You want people to think you have the mandate of heaven, and you got stuff under control. So, authorities on neither side of the strait are very happy about this pirate couple. Then in 1803, Taichuan teams up with another pirate surnamed Zhu, and between the two of them, they've got about 600, maybe even 700 vessels. So Tsai in 1804 leads just 60 of these vessels to go plunder Penghu and then lots of spots along the Taiwan coast. In 1804, Taichuan's wife, the pirate queen, takes a team of pirates further south to what today would be Donggang in Pingdong. Her pirates destroyed the Qing forces in Donggang, captured the town, but despite winning the battle, this would be her last. So, as noted, this pirate queen was famous for speaking English, and she was also famous for her love of smoking opium, and she was, let's say, quite progressive in her personal life. She would pick out various handsome pirates and summon them to her quarters whenever she wanted. And apparently her husband had no problem with this, as he wasn't big on monogamy either. Tsai Chan was a womanizer, and it has to be said that many, or some, who knows how many of his conquests were probably not consensual. An interesting line from the book says, quote, "One can also speculate that some of his buccaneers took native women for wives. Legend has it that the offspring of the Taichuan pirates forged the nucleus of a small coastal community called Budai in Jiayi County, where 85% of the population today bear the family name of Tsai." End quote. Okay, so back to the Pirate Queen. Taichuan Ma was known for being a furious fighter, and there are rumors that even claim she would take off her shirt before battles, which might have been a very interesting strategy that confused the other side. Or she might have had practical reasons for doing this, like not wanting the shirt to catch fire or get it caught in the fighting. But in any case, it's quite an image to consider. Imagine a topless pirate woman charging across a plank onto your ship with a sword in one hand and an incendiary device, the grenades of the early 1800s, in her other hand. She throws the device and your ship catches fire before she starts slashing her enemies with her sword. Pretty wild stuff. I should note that there are so many conflicting stories. You can read so many different accounts, and some of them are clearly half fiction or even more than half fiction. So regarding her death, in one of the stories she dies by jumping in front of a cannonball. Not sure why she would have wanted to do that, but the legend I read was that she did it to save someone else. But probably the story that has the most validity to it is that she was struck by a cannonball, grievously wounded, and died in that raid on Donggang in 1804. So, 1805 comes around and her husband, Tsai Tren, is still very active in the estuaries of Taiwan. So here's an interesting example from the book Maritime Taiwan. It says, quote, "During the one-year span of 1805 to 1806, when Tsai Tren launched his full-scale systematic attacks on coastal Taiwan, the raiders sacked and burned the county offices of Danshui, Jiayi, and Fengshan." End quote. The book continues with a report about how much rice the pirates stole from various granaries across Taiwan. And it says, quote, "During the late spring of 1806, Tsai's raiders killed no fewer than 1,578 militiamen, plus thousands of poorly trained imperial troops." And then it says, in his wake he left a total of over 400,000 refugees. A little tiny redeeming factor maybe. Quote, "It must be noted, however, that Tsai distributed some of the rice and money he extracted from the mandarins among the refugees. So, not exactly Robin Hood, but, better than nothing." So although he was a pirate, Tsai Tren was also, in many ways, a politician. And like many other politicians, he wasn't above using religion as a way to further his aims. Many people at that time on the western coast of Taiwan were believers in the goddess Mazu, and Tsai Tren presented himself as a devout follower of Mazu. But reportedly he would then say something like, "Yeah, we're all really into Mazu and all that, but if you don't pay certain protection fees, I can't really tell you that Mazu will protect you in the event something might happen." He makes contact, or some say he's put in contact with, people in Taiwan who are still fans of the Ming dynasty. And they're hoping that he might become the next Qing, essentially. A restore the Ming fighter based on Taiwan. And it doesn't seem like it took a lot of persuasion to convince Tsai Tren to upgrade his status from pirate lord to king. Tsai Tren was pretty much like, "Cool, yeah, let's set up a new kingdom, and absolutely, I'll be king." And it wasn't just idle talk. In fact, he even had people draft an inauguration decree, and in the fashion of wannabe Chinese kings for centuries, he comes up with a cool title for himself. Tsai Tren proclaims himself the king who stabilizes the seas and possesses military might. Which is, yes, a bit wordy, but still pretty cool. Then he announces his intention to start his own dynasty, which he's going to call the Guangming or Enlightenment Dynasty, a rival to the Qing dynasty. He even starts ordering the making of banners, royal seals, and all the other stuff you need for creating a dynasty. So, put simply, Tsai Tren is pushing things a bit far, and in doing so, he attracts more attention from the imperial court in Beijing, which orders an additional 1,000 troops, sent to Taiwan under a general surnamed Li, and their orders are to eliminate Taiwan. So General Li is sent by the Qing dynasty, and he lands those extra troops in Lugang, and starts going south to try to chase the pirates off the island, but one story goes that Taiwan just hops on a ship, sails away, and bides his time. Taiwan apparently lays low for a while, and his patience pays off, as the next year Taiwan lands in Danshui and annihilates a taken-by-surprise Qing garrison force. 24 officers and 2,000 troops, reports say, were slain. This attack is a shockwave that spreads across the island. The Qing authorities are furious, but their ships are not as well armed as the pirates' ships are. One-on-one, Tsai would win. But the Qing have the luxury of ordering more ships built and more soldiers sent to chase Taiwan, and by 1806, Tsai has lost perhaps 50 or 60 vessels and as many as 10,000 troops. So he's not going to become the Sea King or Emperor of Taiwan anytime soon. But he's still alive, and as the author of the book Maritime Taiwan points out, Taiwan's very existence is still demonstrating the impotence of the Qing as rulers of Taiwan. So we see Taiwan still raiding in 1806, 1807, and then in 1808 he scores a major victory by killing the Qing general sent to get him, the aforementioned General Li. Following the death of this General Li, 2 of his subordinates are sent to continue the task, and eventually the Qing forces overwhelm Taiwan in the summer of 1809. The story goes that Tsai's ship became cornered near a small island just off the coast of China's Zhejiang province, and again we have conflicting reports on how he died, but all agree that he elected to take his own life rather than be taken prisoner, which was probably a wise decision, as if he had been taken prisoner, his fate would have been something pretty nasty after a little visit to Beijing. So one story I read has him shooting himself with a gold bullet, which I don't know, sounds a bit implausible, as gold is a rather soft metal. I don't know how good gold would be for making bullets. Anyway, another story has him lighting all the dynamite on his ship and blowing himself up with the ship. But my favorite story claims that his flagship's anchor was made of gold, and he ties himself to this anchor and jumps into the sea and drowns. And while the golden anchor story is kind of cool, the most likely way he and a few of his surviving relatives ended, however, is wounds from cannonballs and then a decision to drown rather than face capture. A few months later, that other pirate that had allied with Taiwan, the guy called Zhu, also met his end near Xiamen, and this made the emperor so happy he gave the victorious commander a hereditary rank, 3rd-class Earl. Taiwan and his pirate queen and their friend Zhu were gone, but piracy in the Taiwan Strait would live on for many, many more years, all the way into the 1840s. Here's a quote. By the 1830s and 1840s, Chinese pirates often worked in collusion with plundering raiders from Southeast Asia and acquired larger vessels, sometimes 3 to 4 times bigger than the imperial junks they were engaging. End quote. The book also says the pirates all the way into the 1840s were generally equipped with heavier guns, better cannons that had been purchased from Europeans. And here's another quote. The cannonballs used by the imperial junks weighed only 1 to 2 caddies each. 1 caddy is equivalent to 1.33 pounds. But the artillery balls or cannonballs used by the pirate ships were not only bigger, but had a greater velocity and a longer trajectory. And before we go, just a note that Taichuan Ma was not the only famous Chinese female pirate. If you're interested, I suggest you go look up a woman called Zhen Yixiao, who, as so many other Chinese people, has a collection of names, also known as Sixianggu, Shekyong, and Qingshi. She was a Chinese pirate leader active in the South China Sea, so closer to Vietnam from 1801 to 1810. I think the coolest thing about this pirate queen, this Qingshi woman, born in 1775, she was born in a brothel in Guangdong and worked as a prostitute on a floating brothel. Allegedly. There's no real proof for this. In any case, there is proof for her eventually commanding 400 junks, maybe 40, maybe 60,000 pirates in around 1805. And get this, she died peacefully in 1844 at the age of about 68. She negotiated a deal with the Qing to not prosecute her and even let her keep part of her fleet. Some people have described this woman as one of history's most successful female pirates, or even one of the most successful pirates in history, period. I'll put links in the show notes to this story. So yeah, check out the links in the show notes, and you'll find some stories of rather formidable pirates, or pirate queens, operating in the Taiwan Strait or in the South China Sea. And these folks have stories that, in my view, are quite a bit more interesting than stories of Blackbeard and certainly of Johnny Depp and Pirates of the Caribbean. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'm Eric Michael Smith. Bye.